Ania Blackstone couldn't help but smile as she drove into her hometown of Brookridge. The small town, nestled at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains, looked just like she remembered it. Old shops lined the main street, their faded signs a reminder of simpler times. Tall trees with their branches reaching out over the road created a canopy of green, filtering the bright sunlight. It had been years since Ania had been back. The last time she was here, she was just a rookie cop, fresh out of the academy with big dreams. Now she was returning as Chief Ania Blackstone, head of the police department in the nearby city of Eastgate. It was a position she'd worked hard for, earning respect from her officers and the community alike. But today, Ania wasn't here on official business. She'd come back because her dad was sick. Despite their rocky relationship, she knew she needed to be there for him. As she parked her car outside Joe's corner store, the same place she used to buy candy as a kid, Ania took a deep breath. She was dressed casually in jeans, a fitted jacket, and sneakers. Today, she just wanted to be Ania, not Chief Blackstone. Stepping out of her car, Ania stretched and looked around. The familiar sights and smells brought back a flood of memories. For a moment, she felt like that young girl again, full of hope and determination to make a difference in the world. Little did she know, her homecoming was about to take an unexpected turn. Chapter 2. The Confrontation. "Hey, you there?" A harsh voice suddenly called out, shattering Ania's peaceful moment. Ania turned, her cop instincts kicking in immediately. She found herself face to face with a burly, middle-aged white officer. His face was set in a stern frown, and the badge on his chest caught the sunlight as he approached. "Is there a problem, officer?" Ania asked calmly, keeping her voice neutral. She'd dealt with guys like him before, the type who saw her skin color before they saw anything else. The officer, whose name tag read Cutter, stopped a few feet away from her. His eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down, clearly judging her appearance. "What are you doing in this part of town?" Cutter demanded, his voice dripping with suspicion. Ania raised an eyebrow, surprised by the hostile tone. "I'm just visiting," she replied simply. Cutter scoffed. "Visiting, huh? This area's had some trouble lately. Gangs, drug dealers. You match the description of someone we've been looking for." Ania's stomach tightened. She knew exactly where this was going, and she didn't like it one bit. "I'm not involved in anything illegal," she said firmly. "I'm here to see family." "That's what they all say," Cutter shot back. "ID. Now." For a split second, Ania considered revealing her identity as a police chief, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the stubborn part of her that wanted to see how far this would go. Or maybe it was the fact that she knew how officers like Cutter treated people who looked like her. Either way, she decided to stand her ground. "I don't need to show you my ID," Ania replied, her voice steady. "I haven't done anything wrong." Cutter's face darkened. "You refusing a lawful order? That's obstruction." Ania felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't back down. "I know my rights." What happened next shocked even Ania. Cutter's face twisted in anger, and before she could react, he grabbed her arm forcefully. "You think you're smart, huh?" he growled. "Let's see how smart you are down at the station." Ania felt the grip on her arm tighten as Cutter started to drag her towards his patrol car. Around them, a small crowd began to gather, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. "Let go of me," Ania said, her voice low but commanding. "Or what?" Cutter shot back, his tone mocking. "You gonna resist arrest?" Ania clenched her jaw, fighting the urge to fight back physically. Years of training had taught her restraint, but she couldn't believe this was happening. "You're making a mistake," she warned, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "Yeah, we'll see about that," Cutter sneered as he opened the back door of his patrol car and shoved her inside. As the car door slammed shut, Ania found herself in a situation she never thought she'd be in again, in the back of a police car, but this time as a suspect. Through the window, she could see people in the crowd taking out their phones, recording the incident. A wave of humiliation washed over her, but she reminded herself that this wasn't about pride. It was about something much bigger and more important. Chapter 3. The ride to the station. As Officer Cutter's patrol car pulled away from the scene, Anya sat in the back, her mind racing. She watched her hometown pass by through the window, now seen from a perspective she never thought she'd experience again, as a detainee. The irony wasn't lost on her. This was the same town where she had first decided to join law enforcement, inspired by a desire to protect and serve. Now, here she was, being treated like a common criminal by one of her own. She could feel her phone vibrating in her pocket, no doubt buzzing with missed calls from the other officers she was supposed to meet at the local police station. This informal visit to catch up with old colleagues had taken a very unexpected turn. Cutter's voice crackled through the police radio as he spoke with dispatch. "I've got one in custody," he said casually, as if this was just another day on the job. His arrogance was palpable. Some smart-mouthed woman causing a scene. Anya's jaw tightened at his tone. He had no idea who she was, and she took a deep breath, reminding herself that revealing her identity at the wrong moment would only make the situation worse. Timing was everything. As they drove, Anya's mind wandered to all the people who had ever been in her position, wrongfully accused and treated like they didn't matter. She thought about the young men and women she'd mentored, the community outreach program she'd started in Eastgate. All of it seemed so far away now. They arrived at the station within minutes. Cutter roughly pulled her out of the car and dragged her through a side entrance, bypassing the main lobby. Anya realized he was trying to avoid more public scrutiny. The onlookers outside had already captured enough footage. As Chapter 4, the interrogation room. Cutter shoved Anya into an interrogation room, locking the door behind him. "Sit tight," he muttered before stepping outside to talk to someone on his radio. Anya sat down, her hands cuffed in front of her. The cold metal bit into her wrists, a sensation she hadn't felt since her training days. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the past half hour. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been in her position, wrongfully accused and treated like they didn't matter. Just as Anya was steadying herself, the door creaked open again. This time a different officer entered. He was calmer, less brash than Cutter. His nameplate read, Officer Henderson. Henderson looked at her with a puzzled expression, his eyes flicking between the cuffs on her wrists and her face. "Ma'am, there's been some confusion," he started, but Anya cut him off. "There's no confusion, Officer Henderson," she said calmly. "Your colleague doesn't know who I am." Henderson frowned. "Who are you, then?" Anya leaned forward slightly, her voice measured and calm. "Chief Ania Blackstone. I'm the police chief from Eastgate City." The weight of her words hit Henderson like a punch. He blinked rapidly, glancing down at her restrained hands in disbelief. "Wait, you're a police chief?" "That's correct," Anya said. "Now, I suggest you get your captain down here before this gets any worse for your department." Officer Henderson stood frozen for a moment, processing the gravity of what was happening. He stammered a quick, "Yes, ma'am," and rushed out of the room, leaving Anya alone again, but this time with a sense of control returning. Chapter 5, The Revelation. Minutes later, the door burst open again. This time it was Captain Lee, the head of the Brookridge precinct. His face was pale as he hurried into the room, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of Anya in handcuffs. "Chief Blackstone, He started, but stopped himself, unsure of what to say. His hands shook slightly as he fumbled with the keys to unlock her cuffs. Anya stood up, rubbing her wrists once the cuffs were off. She fixed Captain Lee with a sharp gaze. "You need to get your officers in line, Captain," she said coolly. "What happened today is unacceptable." I had no idea," Captain Lee stammered, clearly embarrassed by the situation. "Officer Cutter didn't realize who you were." "It shouldn't matter who I am," Anya snapped. "This isn't about rank or title. It's about respect and basic decency." He saw my skin color and immediately assumed the worst. Captain Lee lowered his head, shame written all over his face. "I'll handle this, Chief. Officer Cutter will be disciplined." "That's not enough," Anya said, her voice low and steady. You've got a systemic problem on your hands, Captain. One bad cop is a symptom of something much deeper. Lee looked visibly shaken as the words sunk in. You're right, he said quietly. We have work to do. Yes, you do, Ania replied firmly, and it starts with accountability. Make sure Cutter knows the full weight of what he's done. Chapter 6. Facing the Public. As Ania walked out of the station, her head held high, she felt a deep sense of vindication, but the victory was bittersweet. She knew this wasn't just about one officer or one incident. It was about a system that had allowed this kind of behavior to persist for too long. Stepping out into the daylight, she noticed a crowd had gathered outside the station. Many of them had seen the arrest unfold and were now waiting for answers. As Ania approached, the whispers grew louder, and a few people held up their phones, recording. She paused for a moment, looking at the faces around her. Some were curious, some supportive, others still unsure of what to believe. Ania took a deep breath and turned to face them, ready to speak her truth. Thank you all for your patience, she began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I want to address what just happened inside. I was wrongfully detained by Officer Cutter, who, based on the color of my skin, assumed I was a criminal. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. Racial profiling is not just a personal issue, it's a systemic one, she continued. As law enforcement, it is our duty to protect every citizen, regardless of their background. Today, that duty was betrayed. A woman in the front, her arms crossed, spoke up. What are you going to do about it? How can we trust the police if this is how they act? Ania's gaze softened as she met the woman's eyes. Trust is earned, and it starts with accountability. I'm going to ensure that Officer Cutter is held responsible for his actions. This incident will not be swept under the rug. As the crowd started to disperse, Ania could feel the weight of their expectations. As she turned to leave, a familiar voice called out from the back, Chief Blackstone. She turned to see an old friend, Mark, stepping forward. I'm glad you're okay. I've known you since we were kids. You always had a way of standing up for what's right. Thank you, Mark, she replied, her heart warming at the familiar face in the crowd. But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us, about ensuring that no one else has to endure what I just did. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. As she walked away from the station, Ania received a call from her assistant, Jasmine. Chief, are you okay? I saw the footage online. It's going viral. I'm fine, Jasmine, Ania assured her, but I need you to prepare a press release. We need to address this head-on and not allow the narrative to be twisted. The next day, a press conference was held at the police station. Ania stood at the podium, flanked by Captain Lee and several other officers. The atmosphere was tense as reporters jostled for position, eager to get the latest scoop on the incident. Thank you all for coming, Ania began, her voice clear and commanding. I want to address the incident involving Officer Cutter and myself, which has raised serious concerns within our community. Cameras flashed as she continued. This incident is not an isolated one. It is part of a larger pattern of racial bias within law enforcement. We are committed to rooting out these practices within our department and rebuilding the trust between the police and the community. A reporter shouted a question. What specific actions will you take against Officer Cutter? He will face disciplinary action, and I will ensure that this incident is thoroughly investigated, Ania replied firmly. Moreover, we will be implementing new training protocols to address racial bias and ensure that all officers are held to the highest standards of conduct. The room buzzed with murmurs, and Ania could see the relief on some faces. They were ready for change, and she was determined to be the catalyst. Chapter 8. The Road Ahead. In the weeks that followed, Ania threw herself into the work of reform. She met with community leaders, held town halls, and worked closely with Captain Lee to implement new training programs for the Brookridge police force. Officer Cutter was suspended pending a full investigation, and Ania made sure the process was transparent, keeping the public informed every step of the way. One evening, as she sat on her father's porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ania reflected on how much had changed since that fateful day at Joe's corner store. Her father, now recovering, sat beside her, their relationship slowly mending as they worked through years of misunderstandings. "You know, Ania," her father said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I always knew you'd do great things, but what you're doing now, it's bigger than just being a good cop. You're changing the whole system." Ania smiled, touched by her father's words. "It's not easy," she admitted. "Sometimes it feels like for every step forward, we take 2 steps back, but we have to keep pushing." As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a message from Captain Lee. It was a reminder about the upcoming community event they had planned, a celebration of unity and progress. It would be a chance for officers and residents to come together, share stories, and foster connections that would bridge the gap that had long divided them. Ania stood up, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. There was still work to be done, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With unwavering determination, she knew she would continue to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for every voice that had been silenced. As she stepped back into the house, Ania felt the cool evening air wrap around her. The fight for equality would persist, and with each passing day, she would strive to ensure that no one would ever have to endure the injustices she had faced. And so, the story of Chief Ania Blackstone continued, a story of resilience, hope, and the unyielding quest for justice in the face of adversity. The struggle might be ongoing, but with unity and courage, they would forge a path toward a brighter future for all. Epilogue: A New Dawn. A year had passed since that fateful day in Brookridge, and the town had undergone a remarkable transformation. The police department, under the guidance of Captain Lee and with ongoing support from Chief Blackstone, had become a model for community-oriented policing. Officer Cutter, after a thorough investigation, had been dismissed from the force. More importantly, his case had become a teaching tool, a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked bias and abuse of power. As Ania walked down Main Street, she couldn't help but notice the changes. The atmosphere was different now, more open, more trusting. People smiled and waved at the officers patrolling the streets, and the officers responded in kind. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She paused in front of Joe's corner store, the place where it all began. A group of teenagers, a mix of races and backgrounds, were chatting animatedly with a young officer. The scene brought a smile to Ania's face. "Chief Blackstone," a voice called out. Ania turned to see Mark jogging towards her, a newspaper in his hand. "Have you seen this?" he asked, slightly out of breath. He handed her the paper, and Ania's eyes widened as she read the headline. Brookridge Police Department named model for reform. "It's not just us," Mark continued excitedly. "Other departments are starting to take notice. They're asking how we did it." Ania nodded, a sense of pride washing over her. "It's been a team effort," she said. "Everyone in this town, from the officers to the community members, they all played a part." As they walked together, Mark filled her in on the latest community initiatives. The police department was now hosting regular town halls, youth mentorship programs, and even a citizens' academy to give residents a behind-the-scenes look at police work. They reached the newly renovated community center, where Ania was scheduled to give a talk to a group of aspiring law enforcement officers. As she entered the building, she was greeted by a diverse group of young faces, all eager to learn and make a difference. Taking her place at the podium, Ania looked out at the audience. She saw hope, determination, and a genuine desire for change in their eyes. It reminded her of herself when she first joined the force. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice strong and clear. "Today, I want to talk to you about what it truly means to protect and serve. It's not just about enforcing laws, it's about building trust, fostering understanding, and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult." As she spoke, Ania reflected on her journey, from a young rookie cop to a change-maker who had faced adversity head-on. She knew that the road ahead was still long, but looking at the faces before her, she felt a renewed sense of hope. "The badge you will wear is not just a symbol of authority," she continued. "It's a symbol of responsibility. To your community, to your fellow officers, and to yourselves. Never forget that." After her speech, as the young cadets gathered around her with questions and words of admiration, Ania felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Captain Lee, a warm smile on his face. "Chief," he said, "I just wanted to thank you. What you did, it didn't just change Brookridge, it's changing how we think about policing everywhere." Ania nodded, feeling a mix of humility and pride. "We're not done yet, Captain," she replied, "but we're on the right path." As she left the community center that evening, the setting sun casting a golden glow over Brookridge, Ania felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The town she loved, the profession she had dedicated her life to, they were evolving, growing, becoming better. She thought back to that day when Officer Cutter had handcuffed her, how close she had come to giving up, but she hadn't. Instead, she had turned that moment of injustice into a catalyst for change. Ania smiled to herself as she walked home. The journey wasn't over. It never really would be. But with each step forward, with each mind opened and each life touched, they were creating a future where justice and compassion walked hand in hand. And in that future, perhaps one day, no one would have to experience what she did. No one would be judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. It was a future worth fighting for, and Ania Blackstone was ready for the challenge. As she reached her front porch, Ania took one last look at the town she had helped transform. Brookridge was no longer just her hometown. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to what could be achieved when people came together to fight for what was right. With renewed determination, Chief Ania Blackstone stepped into her home, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. For she knew that as long as there were people willing to stand up for justice, there would always be hope for a better world.